All that crossed her mind was the most efficient path to victory. Rei being another human was not a factor. Still, it had not escaped her attention how Rei had struggled with indecision during their fight. On reflection, she began to faintly feel something she couldn't express. In the modern era of Yu-Gi-Oh!, there exists a brand new narrative structure within the cards, one that contrasts greatly with the original narrative design of the series. In the original series, back when Yu-Gi-Oh! Was mostly a tie-in product for its anime and manga, the monsters, spells, and traps were things the player were casting themselves. When you summon Blue Eyes White Dragon, you are fulfilling the fantasy of being a powerful card mage like the characters in the show. With the exception of a couple recurring gag characters and popular anime monsters, the early age of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was very light on inter-card storytelling, and very heavy on cool fantasy aesthetics. This was assisted by the gameplay design, where complex card interactions were limited, and most monsters had no special effects. A player's deck represented a somewhat random assortment of magical abilities. The first major change to this format was the introduction of archetypes, cards with the same name or type whose effects all synergize with each other. Dinosaurs, for example, had a unique game plan revolving around evolving their smaller dinosaurs into Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, a huge boss monster who could win games on its own. The second major change was the diversification of the role of the player in the story of the cards. Some archetypes in the modern age are less meta than others. The Sinful Spoils storyline, for example, is primarily a linear story with a beginning, middle, and end, told across the different cards and archetypes that encompass the world. When you activate Wanted, Seeker of the Sinful Spoils, to search for Diabellstar, you aren't exactly casting a spell in the traditional sense. You are instead reenacting a storyline with the cards acting as symbols for different events in that storyline. The point of all this background is to familiarize you with the fact that modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is now as often textual as it is metatextual. The events occurring across the cards themselves are just as important as the stories they create through gameplay. And a large amount of the most successful archetypes revolve around one thing: lesbian angst. While strict demographics are essentially impossible to nail down, a survey by Yu-Gi-Oh! Player Hakuna Maidata with over 1,600 respondents in 2022 found that only 6% of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players identified as women, an astoundingly low number. This is not perfectly representative. Master Duel, the online Yu-Gi-Oh! Client, has over 250 million downloads. But in terms of physical paper play, it is a given within the community that women are few and far between, although they make up all levels of play, including the highest one. Therefore, important questions to ask yourself as we walk through these narratives are: who are these stories for? Who is the intended audience? Why are they so popular? I ask you to put yourself in the shoes of two groups: the cishet male otaku, and the long-time or new queer female audience for these cards. Elements targeted at both groups exist within these stories, but they are at odds with and contradict each other. Across all of the major lesbian stories in Yu-Gi-Oh!, while Kiss to Kill might touch her girlfriend's butt, no same-sex kiss has ever occurred. No matter how clear the lesbian identity is between the lines, it is never stated outright. In an essay for the Australian Journal of Communication, Alan McKee writes that the climactic moment of the kiss in romance stories stands in for the marker of true love. However, no matter how much love is shown in these cards, the quote-unquote act of true love cannot be performed. Quote, touching a man's hand, straightening his tie, this is the physical contact that replaces kissing as the performance of same-sex desire. Steven can talk about homosexuality, but he cannot do it. We'll get more in depth about other ways that love is shown, especially through fighting, in the next section. But to describe the lack of a kiss as merely homophobic censorship is not quite the full picture. It is also misogynistic censorship. The evil twins, arguably the most popular of all the gay archetypes, are VTubers by day and Phantom Thieves by night. VTubers are streamers or YouTubers who use a virtual avatar linked to their real movements as the stand-in for themselves. Often, these creators perform a sort of exaggerated character and create their own fun lore. While VTubers in a vacuum are simply a fun form of self-expression, on the largest scale with the biggest creators, VTubers are often tied up into the difficult social and economic politics of the idol industry. Because VTubers blend fictional characteristics and their real personalities together, there is often a push towards parasocial relationships and romantic fantasies. Quote, "This is again compounded by the production and promotional strategies of Japanese idols. In order to sell fantasy relationships to fans, producers and promoters of idols forbid actual romantic or sexual relationships with the opposite sex, even when both parties are consenting adults, which critics take to speak to the sexual perversion of male fans and the sexual exploitation of female idols. The violence of the relationship, existing just below the surface, is revealed to critics in stories about fans attacking idols when they cannot be an idol for me alone." These types of intense fans, inside and outside of Japan, cannot handle characters they find attractive ending up in relationships, as it breaks the fantasy. Some fans take this even further. It is a famous trope within fictional idol series, like Love Live, that outside of background characters and fathers, for which there exists no romantic possibility, there are no men that even interact with the main women at all. Because heterosexuality is the assumed default of our society, the lack of the kiss, the act of true love, is a plausible deniability. Anyone who does not want to see gayness in the story can simply ignore it and assume the characters are still heterosexual. This especially applies to cishet male audiences. For evil twins Kisakila and Leela, whose audience of fans heavily overlaps with real idols, no kissing and as little men as possible. Ghost Meets Girl, Sinful Spoils, S-Force Cybers, Sky Striker. What do they all have in common? Women who are unable to, by tradition, cosmic forces, or politics, be connected with their lover, yet they fall in love anyway. This Romeo and Juliet-esque struggle is not exclusive to gay relationships either. The Branded storyline, one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most popular, which will be adapted into an anime soon, revolves around Ecclesia from an intense theocracy protecting a lost dragon named Albaz who falls from the sky. However, unlike Ecclesia and Albaz, the lesbians spend a lot more time fighting each other before they begin their path of liberation. Before Ray and Rose join forces to take on the tyrannical and imperial systems of their world, they first engage in multiple high-flying, elegant battles. As you saw in the intro of this video, Rose is treated by her nation as a blank slate, exploited as nothing more than a weapon. Ray doesn't see her that way though, and her natural desire pushes her to show her kindness. Ray doesn't just put herself in Rose's shoes out of empathy, but also for combat. She analyzes her patterns and behaviors. She can only defeat her by knowing how she thinks, how she operates, what she wants. Love is war. She can only get emotions out of her by force, she says. Once Ray wins the fight, she creates a small bubble where the two can be alone. She asks for her name and gazes upon her face. She knows their time of privacy is limited, and she chooses to use that time to smile. The S-Force fights are a bit less elegant. S-Force Chiyomaru is a part of the Security Force, a group of interdimensional cops tasked with preventing all the cool kids from having fun. Chiyomaru is tasked with capturing IP Masquerena, a cyber courier. It doesn't go so well, but in the process the two start to develop a relationship. That relationship comes to a head when a mysterious new ninja named SP Little Knight shows up to defend Masquerena as she's about to be captured by another S-Force member. This story is still quite new, and where this act of mutiny goes is yet to be seen, but the connection here between Chiyomaru and Masquerena, and Ray and Rose is clear. Rose and Chiyomaru are bound by their duty to a system that tells them who the villains are, and yet they come to see that those they are chasing are worthy of protecting, and perhaps the systems they work for are unjust. But this Liberatory storyline doesn't just appear in the text. but also on the gameplay strategies of the decks. Traditional Skystriker gameplay, for example, revolves around using Link 1 monsters with Ray as material, representing the different mechanical forms of her Skystriker. The player uses different spells like Hornet Drones and Widow Anchor to represent her techniques and attacks. However, by adding Rose to the deck, the strategy diversifies, using some larger Link monsters and combos, as well as repeatedly attacking with a power boost using Skystriker Mobilized Linkage. Linkage encourages you to have both Ray and Rose in your graveyard in order to take advantage of its attack boost. IP Masquerena is a Link monster that summons other Link monsters on your opponent's turn. When IP Masquerena is used as material for SP Little Knight, she can banish a card on the field. The two are stronger together than they are apart. A lonely, isolated girl sits defeated, surrounded by the shattered remains of her servants, the only friends she's ever known. Her castle is massive, full of helpful furniture and the kindness of her servants, yet all this space is primarily used for one thing: traps. As the villainess in charge of this castle, it is her role to capture and defeat the unnamed knight who regularly storms in to stop her nefarious schemes. But there's a big complication. This lonely, lovely lady has fallen in love with the knight sent to defeat her. She even has a little plushie of her. Labyrinth has every trope we've talked about so far. There's no kiss and no men, but there's also a strong love across some form of traditional or ideological boundary. The gameplay of the deck revolves around setting traps in your back row while your servants protect you from your opponent's assault. You, as the Labyrinth player, take the role of the lady, and your opponent takes the role of the knight. This mild roleplay is a critical part of what makes Labyrinth so special. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a social game after all. Make friends, fall in love, or fail catastrophically while playing. It's all part of the same story. Who are these stories for? While in Part 1 we discussed marketing-focused decisions, and in Part 2 we discussed artistic-focused decisions, here I ask you to think, are they for you? Do you find yourself in the themes, aesthetics, and playstyles that they create? If you do, then they've succeeded. Even something as simple as shiny cardboard can craft powerful, meaningful, queer stories.